Okay, first thing I want to collect the assignment that you had to read and write an evaluation summary of the chapters of Haggai. So pass those over to John. I'll look them over to see how you did on that. What did you think about the book of Haggai?
It was interesting.
Interesting? Why?
It was just like, I didn't really remember reading about that at all. It was really nice.
Okay, so something different than what you remembered ever hearing before? Any other comments? Anybody else find it interesting? Well, today we're going to begin looking at the next civilization, which comes right on the heels of the previous one, and that is Persia. Find the appropriate place in your notes for Persia. Remember that thinking about the statue that Nebuchadnezzar dreamed about, we have the head of gold, which stood for the Babylonian Empire. We have the silver area, the chest and arms, which is the Medo-Persian Empire, which is where we are right now. Then in the future, we'll cover the Greek, the Roman, and the Holy Roman Empire. So we're right here. We also saw the Persian Empire pictured as a lopsided bear. Remember that? And the one side indicated a weaker side of the empire, and that was the Mede part, which we will talk about momentarily. It's actually the Medo-Persian Empire. So the Medes were a part of this empire. They were a smaller tribe that the Persians defeated and then were incorporated gladly into the Persian kingdom of Cyrus. The Medes contributed their Aryan language with an alphabet of 36 characters. They also contributed using parchment and pen to replace the clay and stylus. They contributed an extensive use of the column in architecture. They contributed the Zoroastrian religion, polygamous marriage, having more than one wife, and a body of law that found its influence in the expression, the law of the Medes and the Persians, which we'll talk about later. Here are some words in English for your interest that come from Old Persian. So we see over here the English, and here's the origin of it as we trace it through the Persian language. Well, here it's Deutsch, that's German. So the word father, Pider, pater in Latin, mother, it comes from mater, somewhere in Persian, brother, daughter, the word name, man, give, stand, me, fire, seven, and, right, and joke. All those words have a Persian origin. Now let's talk about the man who is the first and greatest ruler of the Persian Empire, and that's Cyrus. He was a handsome man, and he is the founder of the mighty Persian Empire. In 546, he defeated King Croesus of Lydia, who was a ruler of fantastic wealth. And whom Cyrus then rescued from the funeral pyre at Sardis. So in other words, he was going to be placed on a funeral pyre to burn him, and he was rescued. Croesus, and I want to give you a little information about Croesus because he had some interesting economic achievements. Croesus is the first recorded king to mint metal coins. These staters, or staters as they were called, had Croesus's own image on them and were used in part to finance his wars of expansion. Croesus grasped the idea that debasing his coins allowed him to create more currency and thus to increase the financing. Now, debasing a coin, do you have any idea what he would mean by that? He debased his coins? He would simply make them smaller. You know, cut off the edges, do things to make them smaller. So it looks like you have a quarter, but in actuality, it doesn't have a quarter's worth of metal in it. Now, it's hard for you to understand that because all of our coins are like that now. But there was a time when a quarter actually had a quarter's worth of silver, and a dime had a dime's worth of silver, and so on. But we're past that because we've debased our own currency. But what happens when you debase it? It gives you more money, but it also creates inflation because now those coins are actually worth less in buying power. So Croesus attempted to do that. He illustrated two rules of money creation that would appear repeatedly in world history. First, entities charged with the coining of money have an inherent tendency to inflate its production, and they will almost always do so unless limited by institutional factors, such as the existence of competing currencies or the establishment of a strong metallic standard. So what that's saying is this: whenever anybody has charge over producing money, they're always going to try to produce money that's going to be to their advantage, more money than what is actually there. They want to try to increase the amount of money they have. And they will do so unless there is some other authority that's going to prevent them from doing that, or a strict accounting of how much metal there actually is in the coins. So our government today has the ability to print money, to mint coins, and the standard that was there at one time, that it had to be worth what it says on there, so that it had to actually have the amount of silver that would be required to be a quarter or a half dollar. And it was actually, if you had a dollar bill, they used to say on them, pay to the bearer as silver currency, so that you could go to any bank and turn in your $1 or $20 bill or whatever it was and get that amount of silver for it. That's not true anymore because we no longer have silver backing or gold backing of our money. So our government has done what Croesus and many other governments have done since, and that is debase the money in such a way as to enable you to produce more money, but unfortunately it has repercussions. So the first rule of money creation is that people who coin money have a tendency to inflate its production, to create more coins than, to create more money than what is really there. The second principle is that when money creation is a state function, that is when the government's in control of it, its abuse will benefit the expansion of the central state. So in other words, if the government's in charge of minting or printing money, it will be to the advantage of the government to print more of it and to make more of it. Facilitating the redistribution of wealth to the special interests of the political class and the financing of wars that citizens are unwilling to finance voluntarily. In other words, the government can make more money so that they can have more money to pay for their wars, pay for whatever they want to do. And in this country, it's not only paying for wars, but paying for the social programs that we have. So debasement, which is the increase in the money supply, always causes inflation. Do you know what inflation is? Are you familiar with that word? What's inflation? Inflation is prices going up. Prices are inflated. They get bigger. Prices go up. So this is what happens. And in fact, this is the primary cause of inflation, no matter where in history you are or what country you're in. And certainly in this country, the primary factor in inflation, that is prices going up. And now we're not talking about on a temporary level or because of supply and demand, but artificially going up. It goes up when the government has debased the currency. That is, when the government makes the currency worth less and by printing more of it or making more of it, that makes prices go up. Always happens, has always happened, and it always will happen that way. All right, do you have any questions about that? It's a basic economics lesson for you here in world history. Questions? So, now, sometimes the government tries to hide the fact that they're printing more money or minting more money. In our case, they print because we use a lot more bills than we do coins. And so they won't actually say we're printing more money. I'm trying to remember what the term was that was used in the Obama administration, which was basically printing more money. And like I said, it always makes prices go up when that is done. All right, so we'll move on here with Cyrus in a moment. But I want you to know that at the same time that Cyrus is beginning to build an empire, the third wonder of the ancient world, the Temple of Diana, or Artemis at Ephesus, was built. That was in 552 BC. And a few years later, in 544 BC, the first public library was established in Athens. So, a couple interesting things. All right, now let's get back to Cyrus the Great. Persia, as you know, conquers Babylon under Cyrus. At the end of September 539 BC, they were able to attack and conquer the area on the Tigris River near Babylon. October 10th, led by Gobryas, they occupied Sippar, which is closer to Babylon. And then on October 12th, this is at the end of our unit on the Babylonian Empire, we have Belshazzar throwing a huge feast to show the Persian forces outside the city that he was not afraid of them. He had these double walls, these really thick walls. He had water running underneath, so he has plenty of water, and he's not afraid of their siege. And at that party, you remember, he called for utensils to be used at his celebration that came from the temple in Jerusalem. And as they partied, what happened?
Writing appeared on the wall.
Yeah, a huge hand appeared and wrote on the wall. Pretty scary thing. Struck fear into the hearts of everyone, unlike their attitude toward the Persians. They weren't afraid of the Persians at all. But when this hand appeared and started writing on the wall, that brought about some fear. And of course, Daniel was called, being the chief of the Magi, to interpret the writing. Daniel told Belshazzar that the message from Yahweh was that he had been weighed and found wanting. He came up short. So the kingdom would be taken from him that very night. Meanwhile, and this is the rest of the story that I didn't tell you before, meanwhile, outside the gates of Babylon, the Persians had diverted the Euphrates River so that the water was no longer flowing under the walls, and it became a dry riverbed. That enabled the Persians then to enter the city under the walls. They couldn't break through them, they couldn't get over them, but by diverting the river, they were able to go under the walls. And Babylon was taken that very night without a fight, and Belshazzar was executed. His father, Nabonidus, remember him, was later captured. So that's Cyrus the Great and the ingenuity that was used to get into the city of Babylon. Any questions? Well, Cyrus arrived a little bit later. He wasn't actually there at the capture. He came on October 29th, and as he entered the city, he was greeted as a deliverer, not as a conqueror. They threw green twigs down on the passageway as he was coming. And Cyrus was a benevolent ruler. He was a good guy. He ruled the people in such a way as it would be their benefit. And one of the things he did was in fulfillment of what God had prophesied, and that is that he issued an edict permitting the Jews to return to Jerusalem. Okay, here I thought I had a picture of Croesus, and apparently don't have didn't remember the right order. Here's Croesus and all his money, defeated by Cyrus the Great, and Cyrus spares his life. Okay, now, oh, there's the rules I just gave you. Oh, sorry, I had them on a slide and forgot. Okay, in case you miss anything, there they are. When whoever is coining money, they have a tendency to inflate its production to make more than they actually have the metal. And secondly, it will benefit the expansion of the central state. It will be to the benefit of the government, not to the people. Okay, just two important things to remember economically. If you're writing that down, just write the highlighted part. That's important. All right, let's see what we got next. It'd be a surprise. Though this is Cyrus coming into Babylon. So here he is in his chariot, all the people, soldiers coming along here. You can see the familiar gate there that we saw before. Cyrus being greeted as a liberator. This is a cylinder, has information on it. It's called the Cyrus cylinder, made out of clay. The contents are that he is giving freedom of worship for everybody and calls for a repatriation of deportees. That is, he calls for people to go back to their homelands. This is located in the London Museum. So this cylinder is a part of the legacy of Cyrus, and that he was treating people well and allowed other people, as well as the Jews, to go back home. And this is the first declaration of human rights by Cyrus the Great. So that's what's on the cylinder. It says this: Cyrus the Great, the Iranian emperor, or we call Persian, defined the first declaration of human rights on this cylinder. Cyrus is admired more as a liberator than a conqueror of his vast empire because of his respect for human rights and the humane treatment of those he ruled. He is anointed in the Bible, Isaiah 45:4, as a liberator of God's people, Isaiah 45:15, and the chosen one, Isaiah 48:14-15. One professor says, surely the concept of one world, the fusion of peoples and cultures into oneness, was one of his important legacies. And then here's English translation of what is on that cylinder. I declare that I will respect the tradition, customs, and religion of the nations of my empire, and never let any of my governors to look down or insult the inhabitants of my nations. Is that a change from past civilizations, past empires? Yeah, especially when you think about the Assyrians, exact opposite of the Assyrians, right? I hereby abolish slavery. In the ancient world, somebody abolishing slavery, that's remarkable. My governors are ordered to prohibit exchanging men and women as slaves within their ruling domains. Such a tradition should be exterminated the world over. This guy's quite enlightened. If anyone oppresses others, should it happen, I will take his or her right back and penalize the oppressors. Today, I declare freedom of religion. All are free to choose any religion, live in all regions, and take up any job, provided that they never violate others' rights. This guy's what we call libertarian. You know, everyone has rights. As long as you don't violate anybody else, you have the freedom to do what you want. It'd be nice if our rulers today had such an approach. Well, as Cyrus takes over, he, as I said, issues a decree permitting the Jews to go back to Jerusalem, and he appoints Darius the Mede as a subordinate king of Babylon. Now, this is confusing to a lot of people because there's another Darius that will be named later. But this is Darius, or Darius, some people say, the Mede. He is not the emperor of the Persian Empire. He is the king of Babylon. And he's given titles like that in the book of Daniel. And he is the one with whom Daniel has contact. Now, at this time, Daniel was given a prophecy in Daniel 11 concerning almost 400 years of the future. And we're going to look at that a little bit later on. We're going to look at the prophecy of Daniel 11 and the detail that God gives Daniel there, and then we're going to look side by side and see historically what happened and how remarkable the connection is. Daniel was told that there would be 4 Persian kings who would rule after Cyrus, the 4th being the richest of all. And before I go to that, I should mention one more thing about Darius the Mede. This is with whom Daniel has to deal with in the lion's den. It's Darius the Mede that throws him in there. And after that, Darius wrote a letter. It says, I make a decree everywhere in my kingdom, men should tremble and fear before the God Daniel trusts in. Daniel's God is the living God. He is steadfast forever. His kingdom will never be destroyed. He delivers and he rescues. He works signs and wonders. He has delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. He is the true and living God. So again, pretty remarkable stuff coming from this Persian ruler over Babylon. All right, so Daniel gets a dream in which he is told the 4 Persian kings that would come after, the 4th being the richest of all. These kings were Cambyses, Smerdis, Darius, Gistaspes, that's the other Darius that people sometimes confuse with Darius the Mede, and Xerxes. Xerxes was the wealthiest of all. You can find out the extent of his wealth in Esther chapter 1. If you read that, you will see that he was extremely wealthy. So Persia becomes the dominating force from Babylon over to Egypt. They conquer more than any nation had before them. Now Daniel's also given a view, excuse me, a view of the future, which is sometimes called the 70 weeks of Daniel. Now, this is the view that most people have today of what that 70 weeks entails. I disagree with that, so I'm just kind of telling you that that I disagree with this gap in here between the different weeks. The 7 weeks, the 62 weeks lead up to the cross. Everyone is pretty much in agreement with that. But at that point, I don't believe that there's a thousands of years gap in here before the 70th week. I look at it more like this. We had the 7 weeks, or the 49 years. The decree to rebuild Jerusalem is the beginning of that. Daniel is told Jerusalem is rebuilt, which adds up to 434 years, and then that takes us up to the time when Jesus is anointed, or depending on how you work the years, it may be his crucifixion. And then there's 1 week or 7 years after that, at which time the gospel then goes to the Gentiles. And that's the beginning of his kingdom. All right, so we've had, remember, 3 deportations to Babylon. We had Daniel, first of all, and his friends, and then Ezekiel and others. And then there were a bunch of other people who came into 3 deportations to Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar. Now under Cyrus, beginning with Cyrus, and under Persia, we have 3 returns. And it begins with Zerubbabel as a political leader, and then it goes to Ezra, who is charged with rebuilding the temple, and then Nehemiah, who is charged with rebuilding the wall of Jerusalem. And here's the chronology on through the years until finally here's Cyrus allowing the Jews to return. Zerubbabel leads 50,000 exiles back. The temple's rebuilt under the urging of Haggai, which you read, and Zechariah. And then we have the book of Esther, and then Ezra, a few others return in 458 BC, and then Nehemiah returns to build the city walls. So that's how that all fits together. Now let's look at the return, the 3 returns, and what occurred. I think we will stop here today so that we don't get interrupted for what we are going to begin looking at. And tomorrow we will look at the 3 returns to Jerusalem as the Jewish people come back to the land after being in exile for 70 years. There'll be no assignment for tomorrow. Just look over your notes and try to remember what you can from it as you instruct someone else. Any questions?